How to combat implicit bias. That's the question we're pondering today on The Art of Lifing with Keka. Wouldn't it be nice if we could all combat implicit bias and really try to find a way to eliminate it altogether? That might be a utopian point of view, but at the end of the day, if we want to really address the biases we have that affect not only our life and business, but our society in general, then we've got to ask those difficult questions. Now, in a lot of corporate companies, I've seen companies making the effort to address bias. They'll hire a training company that'll come in. It's a mandatory training for all the employees. They do it, they check it off their list, and they say, okay, this year we have combated implicit bias based on this anti-bias training. And while I think that any effort towards us better understanding each other and really addressing our implicit bias is a big plus, I do think that there are opportunities for us to do more. And most importantly, I think that each and every one of us can become more personally cognizant of where our biases might lie and how we can combat them. So I wanted to share a couple of stories with you around that. A few years back, my brother and I do have to admit, I think this is a little bit of a bad habit, but him and I, when we are outside together, maybe like we might be grocery shopping or at the mall, or even when we've gone to like buy the family car, for example, him and I will speak to each other in Bengali, which is the mother tongue that we grew up in, because my family's from Calcutta, from India. But we'll speak to each other in Bengali, knowing that most people around us don't understand. So it's a little bit of an advantage. Well, it's something we take advantage of sometimes. You know, if we're buying a car and the salesperson is there and I want to say something to my brother and I don't want the salesperson to understand, I'll just say it in Bengali as opposed to English. It's easier sometimes than saying, "Can you excuse us?" every couple of minutes. But sometimes that turns into a bad habit, and there's implicit bias in that as well. One day, my brother and I had gone to a grocery store and we were doing some shopping, and there was a customer in front of us that was just sort of a little bit miserable, being a bit difficult. And so my brother and I are conversing back and forth in Bengali, freely thinking that nobody around us understands what we're talking about. So, you know, when you think no one is listening, you will often say things in a certain way. And if you know that other people can hear you, there's a little bit of a filter. Well, my brother and I had no filter. We were just kind of talking away. We get to the cash register and the cashier is this beautiful Asian woman. I think she was Chinese. And, as we're about to put our things on the grocery belt and we're getting ready to pay for our things, we were astonished when she started to speak to us in the most clear Bengali that you could imagine. It was like she had been born and brought up in Calcutta. And my brother and our faces went red because then we were like, oh my God, she listened to everything we said and we're trying to think in our head, you know, how bad was it? Was it okay? Were we okay? And the cashier just sort of chuckled and she said, don't worry, I agreed with you. Like she sort of, you know, was commiserating a little. But it turns out that this Chinese woman grew up in Calcutta and then came to Canada a few years back. So her Bengali was impeccable. So there's my implicit bias, right? I'm standing at the cash with my brother. We're Indian, we have brown skin, and we're assuming that anybody who doesn't have that brown skin and doesn't look like they might be Indian or Bengali, well, couldn't possibly understand Bengali. Now, that might be a potential harmless idea, but I do think that, you know, when we see in the news, for example, stories about secularism and how we want to remove religious symbols. There's a hot debate in Quebec right now in the news around government policies that are advocating that government employees don't wear any religious symbols. It's a really hot topic, and I do think that sometimes our implicit bias impacts the way we see things, and it comes from a place of fear. And so, you know, when I was 10 years old, the very first time that I remember going to India, prior to that I think it was 3 and I don't remember, but I went to India with my mom and my brother, and then my dad joined us afterwards, and we went to stay at my uncle's house. And he lived in Calcutta in an area of the city that was predominantly Muslim. And that was the very first time that I had seen Muslim women wearing the niqab, where their full face was covered. And truth be told, in my innocent 10-year-old mind, I had never seen anything like that. So I actually sort of poked my mom and I said, why are all of these women wearing Halloween costumes? We're in July. That was the most appropriate thing that I could relate to when I saw these women wearing the niqab. And so my mom said, no, 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 these are women who follow the Muslim religion, and so therefore they keep themselves covered. And it seemed a little bit foreign to me at first. I didn't quite understand it. I was curious as to how they would eat or how they would see themselves. You know, they've got the net over their eyes and it's hard to see. But that was normal there. And so very quickly, I sort of took it in as a 10-year-old and I said, okay, that's totally normal. But my first instinct was, first of all, they're wearing Halloween costumes. And secondly, I was a bit uncomfortable because this is something I hadn't seen. Now, let's apply that lens into our political environments, our business environments, even our social environments, where we might be seeing something we're not fully comfortable with. There is this sense of, well, then let's just get rid of all the symbols because then it just makes things easier. But that's often driven by fear. Because if we say to ourselves, rather than let's get rid of this because we're afraid, maybe let's get to know it better, the result can be so much more powerful. You know, there is a Muslim Women's Association in Canada, the Ahmadiyya Muslim Association. They've invited me many times to speak at their women's symposiums. So they have these interfaith symposiums. They invite women from all different faiths to come together. They have amazing conversations that are really so powerful. And those women and even the men who support them are the most hospitable, most warm community that I've come across. And when I'm in a women's only event in the auditorium, there's 400 women there. Most of them are, you know, they might have the hijab or some of them are uncovered. What I have found is that, you know, when the event is done and they're leaving the venue, they will then cover up. Many of the women will. And the very first time I had seen a couple of women that I saw full-faced all the time that just, I thought they were the most wonderful women. When they put everything on and they covered themselves, I was like, oh, I didn't even recognize them. And I was thinking, you know, this is a woman that I know who's got this beautiful soul, so much love to give, so dedicated to community and community building between different faiths. And then if I see her on the street and I don't necessarily recognize her, she becomes a Muslim woman wearing a niqab that other people might not know. They might not know the beauty that's inside of her. So if we think about the fact that quite often when we just don't know people, we just don't connect with them, that fear leads us, maybe it's our responsibility to approach our own implicit bias and say, I'm going to make a concerted effort to get to know some of these people that I have not known before. Because when you do, in every experience I've had with different faiths, different groups, different nationalities, different communities, there is so much love inside those communities, and when we discover them, then suddenly all those walls, those barriers, and those fears go away, and then telling somebody they have to be secular in a government job becomes almost a moot point. But if we don't make that effort, and we don't try to get to know somebody else, those implicit biases remain within us and sometimes even grow. On our social media feeds, once I saw a whole thread from one of our friends who was talking about the fact that he was very uncomfortable when he saw a woman wearing a niqab. Like basically she was wearing a head covering and then something that covered her face, only her eyes were visible. He said that he was very uncomfortable to see her driving a school bus. And in the social media feed, he said, you know, how is she possibly going to see in the periphery? That's just irresponsible to be like driving with a mask on. And then there were all kinds of friends who related to that and were agreeing to that. And the conversation was ballooning into this, yeah, you know, something should be done about this. This is enough around tolerance. And I thought about those beautiful, amazing women at the Ahmadiyya Muslim Women's Association as I was reading this, and I thought, if they only knew how incredible these women were, how much they care about their children, how they would never, ever do something to jeopardize the people in their community, maybe they should actually go out for a drive with these women to see, can you see from the niqab? It's a fair question if you don't know, but ask the question. Ask it from the perspective of wanting to learn. And if you do that, when you do that, it can change your perspective in a whole different way because now you're experiencing something that previously was unknown. And I actually went onto YouTube looking for something to see if there might be a video or some kind of comment or even an article about how it would be safe to drive wearing a niqab. And you know what? I didn't see anything there. So there's an opportunity for us to maybe look at creating some content. It's been on my to-do list for a while and I need to get to it. But it is something that I think we need to focus on where we need to educate ourselves. When it comes to diversity and inclusion, the highest compliment that I ever got was when I was working at IKEA Canada. We were working on some diversity initiatives, and a woman came up to me and said, "You know, Keka, I just want to thank you for championing this for us." And I was like, "Oh, that's great, thank you." And she said, "I grew up in a very white Anglo-Saxon Protestant community. I don't know a lot about these cultures, and what you've done for me is you've taken the intimidation away, because I feel like I can come to you and I can ask you any question, and even if I don't know it, you're not going to judge me for it, you're simply going to answer it." And that meant so much to me, because I feel like, you know, if we don't know, we should be asking those questions. The very first time I was taking a feminism course in university and I was learning about the rainbow flag with the LGBTQ community, there was so much I didn't know. And I went up to my fellow colleagues and I said, "Can you please help me? Please educate me, because I just don't know." And they welcomed me with open arms. And so it's just every experience that I've had when I've taken my kids to a Jewish synagogue, for example, for a service, or I've taken them to the mosque so that they can see what the prayers are like there. There's just so much richness that's just waiting for us to recognize, learn, and understand. I'm going to leave you with one final parting thought. With this idea of secularism and saying that we need to take away all religious symbols in our government offices and whatnot, let's just think about this. A priest who walks into an environment wearing a collar, like a Catholic or Christian priest, we have so much reverence for that. Even as a Hindu person, I have incredible reverence for a priest who might be doing that, male or female. Wouldn't it be a little bit demeaning and almost disrespectful, whether we believe in religions or not, to ask that priest to take off his or her collar? You know, if a nun walked into a courthouse, for example, or wanted to work somewhere or volunteer somewhere, and if we asked them to take off their habits, is that the right thing to do? If we apply the same rules when we're led by fear to the things that we already know, it immediately becomes clear that that's not really fair. It's not the right thing to do. And so if we can say that a nun has the right to wear her habit, if a priest has the right to wear his or her collar, then shouldn't a Sikh person be allowed to wear the turban? Shouldn't a Muslim woman be allowed to wear the hijab? At the end of the day, one rule applies to all, and we need to be fair that way. And in fear, rather than taking that away from everybody, let's make it a plan to combat our own implicit bias and go out and actually seek out the people that sometimes we feel most scared by, intimidated by, and go and get to know them. Because there's one thing that I can promise you with all the experiences I've had in my life: when you do that and you reach out to somebody you don't know to make that connection, the response you get, the positivity, the understanding, the connection is so powerful that it is absolutely worth that effort. Let's celebrate our differences rather than just being tolerant. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed the content, then please like it and share it with anybody that you think might be interested in this content as well. I would also love it if you could subscribe to my channel. I put out new videos every Tuesday. And last but not least, if you have any comments, I would love to have a conversation with you. Let's do this journey together. Let's master the art of lifing and really do life on purpose.